But Charlie Hennigan in 1964 had 101 receptions. Haywood Jeffries in 1991 had 100. Those are the only two times a Tennessee Titan player, whether it was Houston Oiler or Tennessee Titan, had 100 or more receptions. Welcome to Just the Stats NFL, the show that covers the NFL statistical leaders from the all-time greats to the current players leading the NFL. I'm Ernie Jennings, your host, and I am back looking at another team from the AFC. I'm covering every team in the NFL as we head into the 2025 season. So, in fact, this will be the last place team, the last team from the AFC South, and that would be the Tennessee Titans. I've already covered the AFC East and North, and now we'll finish up the South. And then the next podcast, we will start the final AFC division, the West. So the Tennessee Titans finished the season with a record of 3 wins, 14 losses. Worst team in the NFL, statistically. At home, they were 1-7. On the road, 2-7, and 1-5 in the division. So just all around, not too good. Now, when we're talking about the Tennessee Titans and records, you have to remember that from 1960 to 1996, the Tennessee Titans were actually the Houston Oilers. After the 1996 season, the Houston Oilers moved to Tennessee, and for 1997-98, they were the Tennessee Oilers. And then makes a lot of sense. 1999, they decided to change their name to the Tennessee Titans, which is what their current name is. Tennessee Oilers just didn't sound right at all, made no sense. So Tennessee Titans is the name. So you'll see some records here that belong to the Tennessee Titans when they were still the Houston Oilers, but still a Tennessee Titan record technically. All right, so here we go. How do the Tennessee Titan players of 2024 stand in relation to the greatest Titan players of all time? That's what we're going to find out right now on this episode of Just the Stats NFL. So as usual, we'll begin with the coaches. And by far, Jeff Fisher has the most wins for the Tennessee Titans. Jeff Fisher from 1994 to 2010 had 142 wins. So, and with a winning percentage of .542, not too bad. When they were the Houston Oilers, Bum Phillips was second, but he only had 55 from 1975 to 1980. Mike Vrabel, third, had 54, who is now the coach of the New England Patriots. So we'll see how that goes for him up there in New England. But those are your top 3 coaches at the currently. Current coach, Brian Callahan, had 3 wins. It was his first season last season. Didn't have much of a team, really, so I don't know how you wouldn't hold anything against him specifically as far as the way the team played. We'll see how he does this year. New quarterback. So we'll see. And in fact, let's just move right on to the passing game, and let's look at the quarterbacks for the Tennessee Titans. All time, as far as yards go, like I said, this is Warren Moon when it was the Houston Oilers. From 1984 to 1993, he had 33,685 yards. Steve McNair was second from 1995 to 2005. He had 27,141. Those are the top 2. Interestingly, George Blanda from 1960 to 1966 had 19,149 when he was with the Houston Oilers. Right when they first started. Interesting, because he went to the Oakland Raiders 1 year in 1980 and 1981. Ken Stabler, who was well known as an Oakland Raider, also played for Houston. So that's kind of interesting. Will Levis had a couple years to prove himself as a quarterback. One of the reasons, though, that the Tennessee Titans have just not played well. Will Levis is way down at 15th all time with 3,899 yards. Just can't cut it. And hopefully, as if you're a Tennessee Titan fan, Cameron Ward's going to come in and make a big difference as far as their offense goes. And I definitely think he will do better. So that's yards. Looking at all-time TDs, you have Warren Moon again with 196 TD passes. George Blanda was second with 165. So those are your top two. Will Levis had 21 total touchdown passes. So not really too good. So those are your top all-time touchdown leaders. When we're looking at interceptions, now this is where George Blanda leads the entire NFL in interceptions. So just about, actually, I should say the only person that tops him is Brett Favre. Brett Favre had, in his career, had 336 interceptions. George Blanda had 277. They were the top two all-time players. But out of that 277, George Blanda had 189 of them with the Houston Oilers. So he led the team as far as that goes. Not really that great. Looking at the current core, looking at Will Levis. Will Levis had 16 interceptions, so not that bad, really, actually. He's only thrown an interception at a 2.9% rate, whereas George Blanda was throwing an interception at a 6.8% rate. Quite a difference. But again, as far as somebody catching all these all-time records, it's going to be the new quarterback. And if you're a Tennessee Titan fan, you're really hoping Cam Ward is the answer that this team has been looking for as far as great quarterback play. And we'll just see how he does. When it comes to being sacked, Warren Moon was sacked the most times, 315 times, quite a bit more than Steve McNair, who was second with 229 sacks. Those are the top two all-time for the Tennessee Titan teams. They were actually Houston Oilers at the time, but that is a lot of sacks. It just doesn't fare well for you when you're being sacked that many times. Will Levis was already ninth on the team with 69 sacks, so he was well on his way. If he'd have stayed the quarterback, he could have been sacked quite so often that he would have moved up there. So Will Levis was sacked at 11% rate, whereas Warren Moon, who led the team all time in this category, was sacked at a 6.5% rate. So Will Levis was getting sacked way too often. Just really not good. So nothing really special as far as the current quarterback situation. Like I said, you're really hoping Cam Ward can bring some light to a dark area for the Tennessee Titans. When we're looking at the running backs, Eddie George from 1996 to 2003 had 10,009 yards. And you would have thought maybe Derrick Henry, but he was second with 9,502. And obviously, if he'd have stayed at Tennessee, he would have broken Eddie George's record, but he just missed out by 507 yards of catching Eddie George all time with the team. So those are your top two currently. And obviously, with Eddie George being there, there's nobody currently anywhere near that. Tony Pollard just came in. He had 1,079 yards, but it's just for the 1 year. He hangs around for a few years. He can move up the list, but obviously he's been around a little bit. He won't catch Eddie George for the all-time number. He's not going to play another 9 years, I wouldn't think. So, but Tony Pollard will be back this coming years, and he's a good running back, so we'll see how that goes. But those are the top two as far as yards go all time. When looking at touchdowns, though, Derrick Henry is the lead. He has 90 touchdowns. And Derrick Henry right now is sixth all time in the NFL with 106 touchdowns. In fact, he's tied for sixth with Jim Brown. So Derrick Henry, one more touchdown, and he'll move up into sixth all by himself as far as all-time touchdown leaders. And he only needs 4 to catch Walter Payton for fifth. So I really do see Derrick Henry moving up to at least fifth. Last season, Derrick Henry had 16 touchdowns, I believe. If he does that again, he'll actually move all the way up to third all time as far as touchdown, or fourth, I should say, all time touchdown. So he got 90 of those 106 that he has currently with the Tennessee Titans. Very impressive. Second is Earl Campbell, who from 1978 to 1984 with the Houston Oilers had 73 touchdowns. He almost rushed for the same yardage and so forth, but he was a great running back for the time that he was there. He was a bruiser, just like Derrick Henry. Not as fast, but he really could run through people as Derrick Henry did. Very similar. I really enjoyed watching Earl Campbell when he was in the league. So those are your top two currently. And as I said, there's obviously nobody. TJ Spears currently is the lead. Him has 6 touchdowns. Tony Pollard has 5. So obviously no one's going to be up there. Derrick Henry with his 90, that's going to be a tough record to break. They're going to need to get a rookie running back in there who stays with the team, because when you have 90, as I said, he's already 6th all time. There's only 9 running backs that have 100 touchdowns rushing. So to get to 90 would be very difficult for anybody. So that'll be a record that's going to hang around for quite a while. All right, let's look at receiving, all-time receiving records. And when we're looking at receptions, Ernest Givins has 542. Now, these are some records that should be able to be broken at some point by somebody. I mean, 542 receptions is the all-time best for the Tennessee Titans. Does not seem that many compared to some other teams that we've looked at. Haywood Jeffries, by the way, Ernest Givins was 1986 to 1994. Haywood Jeffries was 1987 to 1995. So they were playing together. Givins had 542. Haywood Jeffries had 515. So those are your top two. And that really is amazing that that's your top two for the number of receptions that they have. Looking at any current players, Okonkwo, I'm messing that up, has 138 receptions. He's a tight end. That's it. There's nobody above him currently. And then Nick Westbrook-Ikine has 126, which just seems amazing to me that that's the best. You have Calvin Ridley on the team, who they picked up. I would have thought, I'm looking for Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins. Well, he's not on the team anymore. Where is Calvin Ridley? I can't believe I'm passing him right by or something here. Calvin Ridley has 64. Wow, some reason I thought he had a lot more than 64. So, not impressive. Well, they'll add to it, but currently this crop of wide receivers they have, I don't see any of them ever catching the top two. They need to get somebody new. I mean, Calvin Ridley's been around a little while. Tyler Lockett's on the team, but again, these are players that aren't going to break this record. So it's going to have to be somebody they pick up in maybe next year or something in the draft or in free agency, more likely the draft. So that's the leaders in receptions. When it comes to yards, Ernest Givins has 7,935. Drew Hill, 7,477. Ernest Givins, 1986 to 1994. Drew Hill, 1985 to 1991. So you see these records. These have been around for a long time. These Tennessee Titans just haven't had anybody. There's nobody in the top 10 beyond 2014 is the closest in 8th place. There's really nobody on this team on a running back, which explains why they're 3-14. No running backs near the top of the list. No wide receivers, no quarterbacks that are impressive in any way. So you can see they have a long way to go to improve. Cam Ward hopefully he's a good quarterback for Tennessee, but he's going to need more help than they currently have. Tony Pollard's going to be good, but I just don't know about these receivers. Calvin Ridley, maybe. He has a tendency to, I believe, to drop some passes. So we'll just see where it goes with that. But really, just nothing impressive. When we're looking at touchdowns, Charlie Hennigan has 51 touchdowns receiving. That's the number one, 1960 to 1966. This is when the team started, and he still holds the record. That's crazy. 1966. We're talking almost 60 years ago, and no one's come near it. Delaney Walker is number 8 with 28. I mean, there's no one even close. So again, they need a lot of work. So those are your leaders as far as that goes. When we're looking at tight ends, Frank Wycheck had 482 receptions. He leads the team all time in that category as far as tight ends go. And the same with yards. He has 4,958 yards. He's the top tight end. He played from 1995 to 2003. So he leads the team as far as those categories go. When we're looking at running backs, Chris Johnson from 2008 to 2013 as a running back had 272 receptions. He's the all-time leader in that category, just beating out Eddie George, who had 259 receptions. Whereas Eddie George just beats him out as far as yards go with 2,144 yards, leading the Tennessee Titans as far as running backs go. So those are your wide receivers, running backs, really nothing impressive. I mean, obviously they had Derrick Henry. He was impressive. He was the one guy, and they don't have him anymore, and they have nobody that's been able to not even fill his shoes, just can't even pick up his shoes. So pretty bad right now for the Tennessee Titans. All right, let's move over to the defense and see how that side of the ball does. When we're looking at interceptions all time, Jim Norton, again from the beginning of this team's history, 1960 to 1968, he leads them with 45 interceptions. Now, Kevin Byard, who was with the team from 2016 to 2023, had 27. He was the closest to the current era. Amani Hooker, 2019 to 2024, had 12. That is the best. And he's still on the team, so he might be able to move up the list a little bit. If he could get two or three, he could move up fairly well. But that's your best as far as when it comes to interceptions all time. When we're looking at tackles for loss, Gerald Casey had 84 tackles for loss. He played from 2011 to 2019. He's the number one leader in tackles for loss. Now here we have Harold Landry. Harold Landry last year, 2018 to 2024, was moving up the list. He has 70. That was your top player. Unfortunately, Landry's not with the team anymore, so he's not going to be able to catch and break this record. He was the closest current player to have a chance. Now, Jeffrey Simmons is still on the team. He's currently number 7 as far as this category with 49, so he still needs another 35 to catch. He won't get that this year. If he plays for a couple more years with the team, he could catch him. Probably 3 years, probably be more like it as far as tackles for loss. So that's one area we could watch and see how it goes. When we're looking at sacks all time, Elvin Bethea led the team from 1968 to 1983, had 105 sacks. Pretty impressive. 30 sacks more than Ray Childress, who from 1985 to 1995 had 75 and a half. those are your top 2 players. And again, this is a category you usually see some players more current, more recent. Now, again, Harold Landry was up at the top of this list, was with a team in 2024. He had 50 and a half, so he's only halfway to 100. That's the best. Like I said, Jeffrey Simmons is the only one. He's 14th, though he's quite a ways back with only 31 and a half. He's the closest. So this current crop of players, there's nobody near the top. That's looking at your defensive players in different categories, career-wise. Let's see how the current Tennessee Titans hold up when we're talking about the more recent play. So let's look at the quarterbacks. Well, again, when you're looking at single-season records, Warren Moon holds the record for the most yards. He holds the top 2 spots, and by 1 yard difference. 1991, Warren Moon had 4,690 yards. 1990, he had 4,689. 1 yard difference. Holds the record, top 2 spots. Ryan Tannehill's third, but quite a ways back. And again, when you're looking at the current players, Will Levis, for example, last year had 2,091 yards, but he didn't play the entire season. There was Mason Rudolph as well. He had 1,530 yards. So really nothing to say about the quarterbacks as far as them and records go, the current, and they're not even current now. So we'll see. Cam Ward, maybe next year we'll see if he can break any of these seasonal records at least. When we're looking at touchdowns, and by the way, let me just say, as I said, as far as yards passing, last season Joe Burrow had 4,918 yards, led the NFL, which when you compare that, even if you combine Levis and Rudolph, they'd have less than 3,600 yards, just over 3,600. So nothing impressive as far as Titans quarterbacks go. Looking at the Titans all-time records, George Blanda, 36 touchdowns he had in 1961, which is still the record by 3. Warren Moon and Ryan Tannehill both had 33. Those are the only 3 players that have had more than 30 touchdown passes in a season. So that's impressive. When we're looking at last season, as far as touchdowns go, Will Levis had 13 and Mason Rudolph had 9 touchdown passes. And Joe Burrow dominated as far as quarterbacks go in yards, touchdowns, and actually in completions, attempts, touchdowns, everything. But as far as TDs go, he had 43. He led the NFL with 43 touchdowns. Baker Mayfield and Lamar Jackson each had 41. Those are your top 3. All of those obviously would have set the record. So those are your all-time touchdown leaders. Looking at interceptions, again, George Blanda, like I said, was number 2 all-time in interceptions. Well, he had the top 2 spots, top 3 out of 4 spots, but he had 42 interceptions in 1962 to lead the team in that category. Not, like I said, something you want to lead with. He only had 27 touchdown passes and 42 interceptions. That's a horrible rate. Last season, Will Levis, example, had 13 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. So not too good there either. And Mason Rudolph had 9 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. Nothing to brag about. And looking at the last category for the Tennessee Titans as far as quarterbacks go is sacks. And again, this time you have Ryan Tannehill and Warren Moon. Both were sacked 47 times in a single season. Ryan Tannehill in 2021 and Warren Moon in 1984. Again, records you don't want to have. Those are the 2 highest totals. Will Levis in 2024 was sacked 41 times. That's terrible. But in 41 times in 12 games. So not good. I mean, Tannehill was sacked that many in 17 and Warren Moon in 16. So to be sacked 41 times in 12 games is not good. Not good at all. When we're looking at for the season, though, obviously that's not as many as Caleb Williams, who led the NFL with 68, which was really not good at all either. 68 put him third all time, tied with David Carr. David Carr had the number 1 spot and the number 3 spot, all time sacks in a single season record. In 2002, he was sacked 76 times. Probably felt like 76,000, but 72 times. Anyway, Caleb Williams last season had the record with 68. C.J. Stroud was second. He was sacked 52 times. But for the amount of games that Will Levis played, I mean, he was sacked 41 times. That's just not good, which tied him for 6th in the NFL. Or 7th, I guess. I should say 7th. That's not somewhere you want to be when you're not even playing a full season. So, all right. Unfortunately, nothing positive really to say about the Tennessee Titan quarterbacks. Let's look at the running backs. And obviously, when it comes to season records, well, they do have a mishmash, but Derrick Henry does hold the record for most yards in a single season with 2,027 rushing yards. Chris Johnson, that was in 2020. Chris Johnson in 2009, who had held the record, had 2,006. The only 2 running backs over 2,000 yards. But you do have Earl Campbell in the 3rd and 4th spot. So he had an impressive showing. This is one of the few teams where you have more than, when you have people that rush for quite a few yards, that is, who have several. Eddie George is on the list, the top 10. So another guy. So pretty good group of running backs that the Tennessee Titans have had throughout their history. So 2,027 yards is the all-time record. Tony Pollard last season with the team had 1,079, which puts him at 25th all-time as far as Tennessee Titan running backs, which is quite a ways down the list. Some teams, he would have been a lot higher with that amount. But 1,079 really led the team by quite a bit as far as running goes. Spears only had 312, was the second best running back. And when we're looking at the entire NFL last season, again, Saquon Barkley had 2,005 yards, led the NFL. Tony Pollard was 12th as far as running backs go with his 1,079 yards. So, not too bad, really. He was a steady player, and when you have a quarterbacks that you're not worried about, it's not very helpful to Pollard as he's trying to run. We should see a little. I expect to see a improvement in Tony Pollard this season with a little bit more help from his quarterback that he'll have, I believe, this season. When it comes to touchdowns all time, Earl Campbell actually holds the record over Derrick Henry in this category. Earl Campbell in 1979 had 19 touchdowns rushing. Really pretty good. Just missing out in the top 11 as far as touchdowns go all time. So he had 19. Derrick Henry in 2020 had 17. Those are your top 2. So those are your top 2 players all time as far as touchdowns rushing go. Last season, this is where Tony Pollard doesn't really compare with Derrick Henry, for example. He only had 5 touchdowns rushing. So I expect to see an improvement in that category. I can't believe you wouldn't. And speaking of Derrick Henry, this time, though, unfortunately for Tennessee, playing for Baltimore Ravens, led the NFL along with Jahmyr Gibbs for Detroit, James Cook for Buffalo. They all had 16 touchdowns rushing. So those are your top players. Whereas Tony Pollard was tied for 33rd. Not good at all. You figure you should, with 32 teams, the worst you should really be is 32nd. So category where they need some help. And I think with Cam Ward as your quarterback, that should help Tony Pollard out some, I think. We'll just see. But it just seems like I would expect that to be the case. When it comes to passing game for Tennessee. Let's look at that. And all-time, Charlie Hennigan. And here again is a category where you just don't have, the wide receivers just aren't much. But Charlie Hennigan in 1964 had 101 receptions. Haywood Jeffries in 1991 had 100. Those are the only two times a Tennessee Titan player, whether it was Houston Oilers or Tennessee Titan, had 100 or more receptions. That is not good, really, when you think about it, over all these years, that's the best. So, for example, last season, Calvin Ridley had 64 receptions. So quite a big difference. And, not necessarily the wide receivers' fault. I mean, if you don't have a quarterback that can get him the ball, that's one thing. But you would have thought somebody might have had a few more receptions considering the fact that they were probably playing from behind all the time. But that's the best. So last season, Jamar Chase had 127 receptions, lead the NFL. And like I said, your best players had 101, best Tennessee Titans had 101 and 100. And as an example, 10 players had 100 or more receptions last season. That's just in one season. So a lot to be left. You really think Calvin Ridley, if he could have a good season, might be able to have more than, I don't know if he might catch 100 if he could stay healthy the entire season. You'd think it'd be a possibility. He's 30. We'll see. If he's still got the speed, he might have a chance. If he holds on to all the passes that come his direction. When we're looking at yards all time, it's Charlie Hennigan again. Incredible. In 1961, on 82 receptions, he had 1,746 yards. That's a 21.3 yards per reception. That's great. So he's held this record for 64 years. And I seriously doubt it'll be broke this year. But that is the record. Very impressive. Last season, Calvin Ridley led the team with 1,017 yards on 64 receptions. Not bad. 15.9 yards per reception. That's pretty good, actually. So that's impressive. But with his 1,017, that would have placed him only 21st. There were 24 wide receivers that had 1,000 or more yards. Calvin Ridley had 1,017 for 21st spot. So basically in the bottom third of the NFL as far as that goes. And again, it was Jamar Chase with 1,708 yards. Now that's by far an outstanding year. Justin Jefferson had 1,533. And then you have a drop right down to 1,282 with Brian Thomas, who was a rookie for the Jaguars, who was third. I will say, though, Calvin Ridley had a 15.9 yards per reception, while, say, Jamar Chase had only a 13.4. So that is, if they could have got the ball to Calvin Ridley more, maybe he even does better than he would have done better, obviously. But with that yards per reception, that's a good number. When we're looking at touchdowns receiving all time, Bill Groman, 1961 for Houston, had 17 touchdown receptions. Now that is good. That's a healthy amount of touchdown receptions, actually. Touchdown receptions. That's what I did mean to say. So that's a good number. I'm looking at the all-time touchdown numbers. Yeah. So that places him sixth all-time with 17. In fact, there's quite a few players actually with 17, but it does put you in sixth all-time with that number. You're in with a group of people, including Jamar Chase, who just this past season had 17 touchdown receptions. So that's one category where you do have a Houston Oiler, Tennessee Titan / Tennessee Titan in the all-time records category. In fact, Jamar Chase with his 17 was quite a bit more than Terry McLaughlin, who had 13. That was the second best. So really pretty good. Now, Nick Westbrook-Akine had 9. That's not bad. When you're talking about 32 receptions, that means about just between one and out of every 3 to 4 passes, he's catching a touchdown. Well, that's healthy. You know, you might think about throwing him the ball more often if he's going to have that many touchdowns out of it. So really incredible. 32 receptions. He had 9 touchdowns. He had 25 first downs and 32 receptions. And he averaged 15.5. That's amazing, really. So we'll see how he does this year. Be interesting to see. Well, he's not going to do it because he's not even on the team. So that's unfortunate as far as that goes. This season, right now, you got Calvin Ridley, Tyler Lockett, Treylon Burks as your top 3 receivers, wide receivers, and then some other ones after that. So I don't know. But he had a pretty good numbers last season. When we're looking at the tight ends as far as receptions last season and all time, Delaney Walker in 2015 had 94 receptions. That's really good. He started only 10 games, played in 15 and started in 10, and he had 94 receptions. That's a healthy amount, but he's the top tight end. And Okonkwo, I'm really butchering his name, and I apologize for that. But last season, he was second in receptions for the Tennessee Titans with 52. So he was your leading tight end. And in fact, when you're looking at it, in the top 3 spots, you had Calvin Ridley as the wide receiver, Okonkwo, tight end, was second, and Tony Pollard was third in receptions for the team as a running back. He had 41. So those are your 3 players when it comes to running backs leading the team. So really, Calvin really could use some help. Tyler Boyd was 4th as far as receptions, but that's just way down the list with 39. So I'm sure Calvin really be hoping for some help. All right. Let's look at the last category here, and that's defense. See how that goes for the team when it comes to defense in a single season. And we'll start with interceptions. Fred Glick in 1963 and Mike Reinfeldt in 1979 had 12 interceptions in a single season. That's tied for 5th all time as far as interceptions in a single season. So really, really impressive. When you're looking at the Tennessee Titans currently, let me get to that here real quick. Last season, as far as interceptions go, Amani Hooker had 5. Dominated the team with 5, which is good. 5 is good. In 14 games that he played, he had 5 interceptions. The next best you had, looks like 6 players that had 1 interception. So he really dominated as far as that goes. And so he'll be back. We'll see how he does again, but 5 is not bad in this time of the NFL and the rules the way they are. So he led the team with that. When we're looking at the NFL this past season, as far as interceptions go, you have, sorry about that. Let me get this up here. My computer wants to not let me do what I'm trying to do. Hang on. All right. Kirby Joseph for Detroit had 9 interceptions. Xavier McKinney for Green Bay had 8. Those are your top 2. And then 5th, Amani Hooker was tied for 6th. So not bad in the NFL. I mean, there was, so he's impressive, and see how he does this coming year. So that's your interception leaders. When we're looking at tackles for loss, Jason Babin in 2010 had 16, and Harold Landry last year had 15. And as I said, Landry is not on the team now, so there goes one of your leaders for tackles for loss, unfortunately, for them. When we're looking at the team last year, like I said, he led the team. Harold Landry had 15. Roger McCreary had 12. Jeffrey Simmons and Arden Key had 11. Those were your top, the only ones actually with more than 10. So those are your leaders. And when you're comparing that to the rest of the NFL, Myles Garrett had 22. So Harold Landry, as I said, had 15. Myles Garrett had 22, and Trey Hendrickson had 19, as well as T.J. Watt for Pittsburgh. They both had 19. So with 15, put Harold Landry down there in 13th. So what about middle of the pack with that 15 total? So those are your leading characters with tackles for loss. And looking at the last category, as far as sacks go, all-time leader for the as a Houston Oilers / Tennessee Titan was Elvin Bethea in 1973. He had 16 sacks in a single season. Jesse Baker in 1979 had 15 and a half, and William Fuller in 1991 had 15. And again, this is usually a category where you see somebody more recent. And as I said, Harold Landry led the team with tackles for loss, led the team with sacks with 9. In fact, no one had more than 10. He had 9. Arden Key had 6.5. Jeffrey Simmons had 5. That's another area where you can see hopefully some improvement for Tennessee in their defense. Trey Hendrickson had 17.5 sacks to lead the NFL. And honestly, there were quite a few players that had 10 or more. So with 9, Harold Landry finished 18th, tied for 18th. That's, again, lower middle half of the NFL. So really not good as far as team goes in sacks category. So that's your Tennessee Titans. And obviously it makes sense. You're 3-14. You're not going to have a bunch of stars on your team. I mean, that's just the way it is. If you did, you wouldn't be 3-14. So Tennessee Titans have nowhere to go but up. They improved their quarterback situation. I believe I've never seen him play an NFL game, obviously, but I just can't believe that he won't be better than Will Levis. So we'll see. But that's your Tennessee Titans, and that wraps up the AFC South. Next will be the AFC West, and with that division, and we finish those 4 teams, we'll be done with the AFC completely. And being that it's the AFC West, and we always start with the first place team, we'll be looking at the Kansas City Chiefs. So stick around as I continue wrapping up and finishing the AFC. And hopefully, if you haven't heard your favorite players mentioned, because that we haven't gotten your team, we'll get to it soon, I hope. And you'll hear some of your favorite players and where they stand all time on their own team and all time in the NFL. Hope you enjoyed this podcast, and hope you look forward to the next one. I appreciate it if you would like or subscribe, or both if you can. Leave a positive comment. That'd be great. That would be helpful as I try to grow this podcast. I have some other things I'm looking forward to doing, but I do want to get through these teams before the next season starts. So that's what I've been heading for. So feel free to hit me up on Facebook, X, or Instagram at Just the Stats NFL, and I appreciate that. So that is a wrap for this episode of Just the Stats NFL. So until next time, I'm out.